We're getting off to a little bit of a slow start. I think okay. I think all of our starters are a little sluggish this morning. So thank you very much for being hardy Minnesotans and showing up. On behalf of Sunday Forum, the Sunday Forum Committee here at Plymouth, we're very happy to have you here with us. At this point, our speaker has asked if you would save your questions for the end. Please, we would appreciate that very much. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen to introduce our speaker this morning. It looks like we're still going to have some people rolling in for a few minutes here, just because of the weather, I think.
Thank you all for coming today. My name is Karen Barstead, and I am the chair of Plymouth Church's Racial Justice Initiative, also known as RJI. And our work focuses on the racial justice connection and how it's intertwined with economic, climate, immigration, education, housing, and health justice. So I first became aware of Minnesota Interfaith Power Light when I went and participated in their Sacred Reckoning series, which outlined a path for faith communities to repair the harm from centuries of white supremacy. Sara Wolff, our guest today, is a climate strategist and strategic policy director for Minnesota Interfaith Power Light. MNIPL is a statewide nonprofit that works in partnership with faith and spiritual communities to realize climate and environmental justice. She's also the founder of Meet This Moment, which is devoted to aligning equitable climate action for the greatest impact. In 2023, Meet This Moment worked with MNIPL and a broad coalition of other organizations to craft and pass the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority, which is Minnesota's new green bank. She's also an attorney, lobbyist, project manager, and communicator. Her previous work includes producing an award-winning documentary and exhibits on methamphetamine abuse and addiction, and executing a conference on improving eyewitness identification procedures for law enforcement. So all of this wraps into racial justice, and we're very happy to have Sara Wolff with us today. Please welcome her.
Oh my goodness, what a nice introduction. That was a trip down memory lane. Thank you. Preparing for this, I was, of course, consulting the work of others. And the writer Drew Dellinger wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times titled Dr. King's Interconnected World. The piece was published in 2017 in December because it was the 50th anniversary of the sermon Dr. King gave at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, in which he told his congregation, "We must develop a world perspective. As nations and individuals, we are interdependent." Dr. King saw connections between movements. And this piece shared that in 1966, Dr. King sent a telegram to labor leader Cesar Chavez, in which he wrote, "Our separate struggles are really one." He visited Joan Baez, similarly, in jail after she was arrested at a sit-in protesting the draft, and said, "I see these two struggles as one struggle." Dr. King wasn't suggesting that these movements, civil rights and peace, merge, but he was saying that they were connected. And at one point he told his staff, racism, militarism, and excessive materialism are inseparable triplets. So famously at this Christmas Eve service, he had this quote, "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize the basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. This was the result of 2 decades of thinking by Dr. King. And as Dellinger writes in this piece, starting in the 1950s, Dr. King expressed concern for the survival of the world and linked environmental and civil rights issues together, saying, "It is very nice to drink milk at an unsegregated lunch counter, but not when there's strontium-90 in it." I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be with you here today. Grateful for this chance to think about the work of climate justice in relationship to Dr. King's life's work and in relationship to the work of Plymouth Congregational Church. I was raised with 2 faith traditions, one of which was First Plymouth Congregational Church in Lincoln, Nebraska, where my husband, Doug, and I were married 25 years ago. I'm Sara Wolff. I'm a climate policy strategist, and I work with Minnesota Interfaith Power Light. Thank you for that great introduction. Thank you, Karen, for this invitation. And I also want to thank Jessica Intermill, who I think was the person who first received this invitation. And she couldn't be here today, but I do hope you get to meet and work with her. She's really wonderful. She's an attorney, and she also runs Intermill Land History Consulting. And so to bring us into this heart of this topic we're discussing here today, how racial and environmental justice are intertwined, I'd like to share some of Jessica's words, and attempt to ground us in this place where we are here physically, its past and its present. This is Dakota land. What we call Minneapolis was and is the heart of Minnesota Makoche. We stand in the home of hundreds of generations of Dakota who stewarded this place for thousands of years and who still steward it today. This land was stolen from the Dakota by the Pikes Treaty of 1805 and the 1851 Treaty of Mendota. And now it is one thing to acknowledge the truth of this fact, the truth of the stolen land, and yet words are made meaningful when paired with action. And so I'd like to highlight a program that Jessica Intermill created, working with the approval of the Lower Sioux community, Lower Sioux Indian community. And it's called the Minnesota Honor Tax. If you are not Native, I invite you to visit this website, minnesotahonortax.org, to consider making a voluntary contribution of an amount that is meaningful to you. Contributions go to the Lower Sioux Indian community, a Dakota tribe. As Jessica says, it is a concrete way to move beyond land acknowledgement to actively recognize our life and our work on Dakota land. Our country broke its promises, but we can make our own. While the land of Minneapolis was stolen from the Dakota, we also recognize that white settler colonizers did not treat all of this land with the same regard. Industry founders treated the Mississippi as a resource, not as a relative. They located extractive industry on the river's banks and in the river's currents, and they placed their own homes farther away on the shores of near lakes, while pushing Black, brown, and indigenous people away from their own neighborhoods toward the pollution of the industry they created. I sometimes find that the words environmental justice are not easy to tangibly understand or visualize what that means, but environmental injustice can be easier to see. I'm showing a slide that is obviously not readable. But these maps tell a story here. And on the first, you just need to see the swaths of color and density here. On the left, we have a map from 1945 showing that racist redlining that was in place, and now this map was actually created by the federal government, uses red to show the areas with the high percentages of people of color who were deemed, quote, hazardous, and were redlined by lending institutions. The middle map is from 2019, and the blue patches indicate poverty issues that were under consideration, and the green patches show where there are populations of people of color above 50% of the population. The areas redlined in 1945 are places where communities and people still feel the effects of these policies. And the map on the right, also from 2019, shows concentration of air pollution. Each black dot, if you can see those, is a facility with an air pollution permit. And the sources of air pollution, which are industrial facilities and freeways, were built in black neighborhoods and continue to contribute to the air pollution in those neighborhoods today. Of course, this has real impacts on people. Higher rates of asthma because of more dangerous air quality, temperature spikes during extreme heat events that are even hotter than the rest of the city. One of the many ways racial injustice is experienced is as environmental injustice. From highways to factories, people holding power have put pollution near Black, brown, and Indigenous people, their air, their land, their water. You may be familiar with this, with Rondo, the vibrant Black neighborhood that was bisected and decimated with the construction of I-94. People no longer had their neighborhood or business, but they had a freeway. And I wish I could say this was a problem of the past, but it is not. The building of highways as solutions for people who don't live next to them continues every year. In Minneapolis, environmental justice, the environmental justice community is focused on many issues, but one is the HERC, the Hennepin Energy Resource Center, which is an incinerator burning our trash. I live in St. Paul, it burns my trash too. And it's impacting the air quality of its neighbors and those downwind, and asthma rates are extremely elevated in these neighborhoods. And we continue to see that the city looks to place more pollution where there already is pollution, in what amounts to creating sacrifice zones. Last year, in the East Phillips neighborhood, which has some of the highest levels of air pollution in Minneapolis, the Roof Depot area was a candidate for the city's maintenance yard. I'm seeing some head nods here, which would involve streams of trucks bringing toxic substances into this neighborhood and community. And one of the letters that I was reading from a community member against the city plan said, "This plan is an abomination given the health realities of the neighborhood. High rates of asthma among the children, high rates of lead and arsenic. For God's sake, the area is known as the arsenic triangle. Plain and simple, the plan to expand the maintenance yard will result in more pollution into the East Phillips neighborhood, and this negative externality must be understood as environmental racism." And they stopped that project, right? That's a real win for the city. I'm really proud of it. And this is the Smith Foundry, which has made news in the last few weeks because the Federal Environmental Protection Agency found that the Smith Foundry, also located in the East Phillips neighborhood, was polluting twice the amount of toxic substances it was allowed to by its permit, and had been for years. So this is an ongoing community concern right now in that neighborhood. And we could go on with examples. our society extracts and throws away. For those who have resources, they take what they need and they want, and they send the waste somewhere else, in someone else's water or air or land. This happens everywhere across our country, but in some places it happens much more than others. Perhaps you've heard of Cancer Alley in Louisiana. In Louisiana, there's an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi River that contains 200 industrial polluting facilities. And these are places where people live, primarily people of color. I just think it's really interesting to think about how our home on the Mississippi River would be different if we had 200 facilities lining it up and down, 40 miles before Minneapolis and 40 miles after. And we do have our problems going into the Mississippi, absolutely. But it's important to reflect that this is happening and affecting communities across the country, and these are truly sacrifice zones. But the energy transition is a chance to change that. Many groups, from faith communities to foundations, from neighbors to nonprofits, see the chance for a better future, one that centers equity as much as it centers climate action. Both are completely possible if we design our solutions to meet those twin goals. We have the technology we need. We almost have everything we need. We are getting really close to the very hardest things. But we absolutely have what we need to make this transition happen. This is a graph that shows the sectors of greenhouse gas emissions from our state. And it breaks it down. The top line is about emissions from the agricultural sector. Transportation is the blue bars. The second blue, light blue, and electricity generation is the third bar, and I have a big arrow pointed there because we had a really big victory last legislative session in Minnesota. We passed the 100% clean electricity by 2040 bill. And when we talk about clean electricity, what it's saying is it's not from fossil fuels. In this case, clean electricity does include nuclear. So if we look at just that sector, for instance, there are two different ways we can achieve this renewable power for our communities. One way is that the power companies, whose shareholders make profit on supplying energy, can build more solar and wind, and they can charge ratepayers for those infrastructure investments, and they can own that infrastructure and continue to charge ratepayers over the years into the future, passing the savings that come with renewables onto themselves and their shareholders. That's one way we can move through this energy transition. Or communities, local governments, schools, families can invest in infrastructure for themselves. Rooftop solar, community solar gardens, they can own that infrastructure and experience the savings of renewable energy for themselves. What we've seen up to this point in our transition is that the vast majority of deployment of solar and wind is going to utilities or those who have resources and are making their own investments, acquiring their own financing, et cetera. So if you are small, if you're in a zip code that financial institutions aren't used to lending to, they may not really want to bother with the extra risk they perceive for these projects, even if it isn't really risky at all. Or if it's a new technology, say networked geothermal, lenders are extra leery. They just don't know about what is possible. So in Minnesota, we needed something that could fill in these gaps. How can we get to the place where our renewable energy transition is also an equitable energy transition? We needed something that other states around the country were already using, green banks. Public money that is used to help attract private money to make it go further and to direct it to places where they need investment in these clean energy technologies, the kinds of projects that aren't receiving funding now. We created the Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority. I did not come up with that name. But this is Minnesota's new green bank. It had its first board meeting back in October. It will have another one in January. It was a real honor to get to work on this. Karen, you said it so nicely, with a broad coalition of organizations, many organizations from the faith community who helped support this. And what MNIPL knew from working with solar projects around the city is how difficult it was to get financing. They have 17 churches or community centers that are waiting to put their solar up, but they're trying to convince lenders that they should loan to this smaller project, or they're trying to convince lenders that it's okay to loan money to this project in this zip code. They're just waiting to deploy that solar that's going to save that church or that community center or that set of businesses money, but they haven't been able to get across that barrier. But this thing is what's going to do it. We're excited. And we're really excited because it is going to advance climate justice at the same time, because the statute says 40% of these funds must be focused in environmental justice communities. I'm just going to do a little bit of, here we are, Julia Nurbon, our executive director, in that far picture is with Emma Greenman and Representative Kraft testifying, and we worked to kind of help people understand what was a hard thing to understand, what this problem is, and how this institution could fill a need here. But the need is particularly the environmental justice communities, and also all kinds of places across the state, rural communities, smaller towns and cities, that don't have someone on staff who can say, we should think about network geothermal. We should think about how we can pair solar and battery storage with our wastewater treatment system. There's a lot of technical expertise that needs to go along with this transition. But I just want to break it down. 40% of this investment that the Green Bank is going to have, and I'll tell you how much that is kind of in a minute, is to be spent on environmental justice communities, which includes one of four things. 40% of the community's total population is non-white, or 35% or more of households in the community have an income that is at or below 200% of the federal poverty level, or 40% or more of the community's residents over the age of 5 have limited English proficiency, or the community is located within an Indian country, as defined in U.S. Title 18, Section 1151, which is why that term is used. We were able to secure $45 million from the legislative session last year to start this Green Bank. And we were thrilled. We got it from 2 different budgets. It's a fun story. But what we know is that on its own, that $45 million, for each dollar will attract $3 to $7 worth of private investment. But we also know that that $45 million starting nugget is going to grow because of the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the federal government back in 21. We think there will be hundreds of millions of dollars that will come to Minnesota because we just built the best darn green bank that the country has. And, and so we are hopeful that we will be the recipient of that. And after we passed this, we started realizing that the Department of Energy, which has innovation funds, is able to use those innovation funds on things that states invest in through their green bank. Those innovation funds are hundreds of millions of dollars directed to kind of a single thing. So if we as a state said, you know what, our green bank wants to fund $5 million worth of electrified school buses for students across the state, we potentially have an avenue to get $500 million of federal funds for electric school buses in the state. If we want to put solar and battery storage on our wastewater treatment facilities through our green bank, we can open up $500 million worth of money through this Department of Energy. This is what helps us take our transition to scale. Let me see where I am. That's unreadable. We'll skip that. Okay. So it's really in the last 18 months that the climate action landscape has changed radically because of these new financial resources at the federal level, at the state level. It gives all of us, churches, businesses, organizations, families, the means to transition to a clean energy and environmentally just future at the scale this moment demands. It also gives us a rare opportunity to make sure we are including environmental justice, that we are working on these issues in tandem, that we need to intentionally center equity in our work. So I will just quickly go over a couple ways that faith communities might consider how they can be part of this transition. One thing that MNIPL is working on is the idea of resilience hubs. What are the assets of a community that can be stabilized with renewable energy and battery backup power so that when a crisis comes, extreme weather, power outages, that can be a resource for the community to come to and engage with. Is it a food shelf? Is it a church or a faith community? Is it a library? What are those resources that can really serve as a resilience hub? A second way we're thinking of how churches can engage in this is to lead this build out of the transition. Essentially, to reach our climate goals, every community needs to ask the question, what is our plan to decarbonize our neighborhood in the next 6 years? Every home, every business, every school, every community center, what do we need? Who do we need to be talking with? And how could, for instance, a church network foster the community energy transition? Many churches have climate and sustainability teams. And they can navigate together the difficult and confusing currently process of decarbonizing their own building. What technologies will we need? Is it heat pumps plus better insulation? Is it network geothermal? Will it utilize solar panels? How will we get the financing? What will that look like? What contractors will we use? Is there a workforce pipeline in your community that can help build it? Imagine the learning that will happen if a church decides to undertake decarbonizing its building, to take advantage of all of the federal and state resources that are available to do that. That's the first part, decarbonizing their own building and space. The second part is taking that learning out into the community and saying, now that we've done it and we've learned, how can we help you, neighbor? How can we help you, businesses that are close to us, or another church? How can we pair with you to share this? So I think that's a really exciting model for how we bring this clean energy transition to scale. This is how we center equity. It's how we build relationships. I'd like to quickly go to zoom out a little bit. I need to take a breath here. And I know I'm aware of time. And John, but I want to plant this seed, because if we want to achieve environmental justice, we have to act hyper-locally, bringing the transition to our own homes and neighborhoods, but we absolutely must have an awareness of the global picture. Dr. King was so prescient. We are bound together. We cannot solve our climate problems in isolation. Achieving our goals requires the complete and rapid elimination of fossil fuels. Not a phase down, not a phase down, a phase out. Now, this is something that the fossil fuel companies don't really want to do. They are trying mightily to figure out how they exist in this new future of climate concern. And the greenwashing, the propaganda telling us that what they are doing is on the right track is incredible. For example, here is the CEO of Occidental Petroleum talking about the way they are investing in machines that suck carbon out of the atmosphere. There's no reason not to produce oil and gas forever. Now, I'll tell you that even if this worked, which it doesn't, there is certainly reason to not produce oil and gas forever. And all we need to look to is our own communities and the communities across the world that have been made into sacrifice zones for this fossil fuel industry. It's really important that we understand the new business model of the fossil fuel industry and how it is showing up in Minnesota's front door. First, they burn oil, natural gas, coal, they produce ethanol, they do other GHG emitting things, and then they invest in carbon capture at ratepayers' and taxpayers' expense to capture carbon from these sources. Then they build tens of thousands of miles of pipelines through the Midwest to take this captured carbon, again at taxpayers' expense, into another place where they are going to pump it into the ground. But here's the part they don't tell you. They want to pump it into their marginally producing oil wells so they can get more oil out. It's called enhanced oil recovery. And of the 12 carbon capture facilities we have currently operating in the United States, 11 of them are designed to take that carbon to these wells to pump out more oil. And because of the way we've set up our tax incentives, they will get $60 per ton for doing so. The fossil fuel industry and our federal government makes it sound like carbon capture is necessary to decarbonize the world. But in fact, they need carbon capture to keep getting oil out of the ground.
Department of Mineral Resources Director Lynn Helms said more carbon dioxide will be needed in order to sustain oil production for the long term. This comes following the Public Service Commission's decision to deny a permit for the Summit Carbon Solutions CO2 pipeline. While Helms didn't comment on the matter, he said the state needs to get the gas from somewhere to help with enhanced oil recovery. The emerging technology uses CO2 to allow producers to take more oil than traditional methods. Helms said current CO2 production only meets about 10% of what is needed for enhanced oil recovery.
We've got to find a way for carbon capture and utilization to become a part of North Dakota's economy. or we will leave billions of barrels of oil in the ground.
Helms said there were 3 draft applications submitted for carbon storage facilities that would have utilized the Summit pipeline, but will now most likely be postponed.
We are about to embark on doing really important things with our communities. But we can't let the good progress we're going to make be washed away by the big, bad things that we also must fight off. So I'm going to leave it there in case there is any more time for questions. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you, and thank you so much for the work and your commitment to these intertwined issues of environmental justice, racial justice, climate justice. Really commend you.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll get the mic to you so that the people who are watching remotely will be able to hear the questions.
Thank you so much. This was super interesting and inspiring. I appreciate you being here. So we, and just as an announcement for everybody here, we at Plymouth do have a climate and environmental justice team. And we are actually working on progress towards what could decarbonization look like for our building. So I'm going to put the plug in to all of you here that I hope that this is inspiring you to kind of, get behind that project, support that project. Our next meeting is Sunday, February 4th at 10 a.m., room TBD. But my question for you is, does MNIPL offer any type of guidance, consulting, technical assistance for congregations that are undertaking, and in our case, a building that parts of our building are over 100 years old, and so to help us understand not only the technical aspect, but also how to get our congregation really excited about this opportunity?
Oh, such a great question. The answer is yes. Buff Grace is a wonderful resource. Brett Pence in Duluth is a wonderful resource in other areas of the state. We are working mightily to be able to expand their capacity. They're doing that now. They want to keep doing that. They'd be so glad to talk with you. So absolutely.
Doesn't seem to be on.
Try now. Please. Oh, there you go.
Hi. My name is Seth, and I work with our climate and environmental justice team here, as well as our racial justice initiative, so I really am grateful for helping us see the intertwining of these things. I have a question, maybe it's a question, about the Resilience Hub idea. I was on a subgroup of the climate framework, and we talked a lot about resilience hubs. I have a question, and I don't know where MNIPL can be helpful in this, which is around trust. We can do everything we can to be a resilience hub. Our electricity already comes from renewable sources. We have solar panels, solar garden. How can we continue to build the trust with our community so that they will walk inside our doors when they need to? How can we become a resilience hub for a neighborhood that is not all Christian, in which we have historical walls put up? How do we begin that transition so that when it is needed, we can be that resource? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, what a beautiful question. I think the fact that you're asking that question with your community is what's important there, and I regret that I don't have a wonderful answer for you. But
neither did the
critical?
climate group I was working with under this, and we talked about it for weeks. And then finally I said, I work at one of these places. You say you want to be a resilience hub. How do you get people to trust us? If you're Somali and you live nearby, why would you walk inside a church? Mm-hmm. The desperation that maybe would be a driving force, but I don't know. It seems like there needs to be some sort of cultivation beyond desperation.
Yeah. we had a staff meeting devoted to this idea of a resilience hub, and our wonderful executive director, Julia Nurbon, said to Brett Pence, I'd like you to speak about your resilience hub in the Northland, in Duluth. And he said, what resilience hub? And she said, you have a resilience hub. And what it had been is cultivation of relationships throughout the community for many years. But it showed up in interesting ways when it needed to. For instance, the pandemic hit, and this group that had been talking about how to deploy renewable energy through their area, et cetera, came back and said, okay, so what are we going to be focused on? Delivering meals to children was what they decided. Because that's what needed to happen. They had the connections, they had the resources, they knew how to get that done, and that was the focus of their work for months. So I think you're exactly doing the right conversation. What resilience is that connectivity we all need to have with our community and our neighbors to know who needs something right now, and what do we have that can help them meet that need.
Thank you.
I'm Gingy Ward. I have just gone off the food shelf board, but the food shelf here really is a community partner, and it is one way that we invite community in.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Okay, well, heck, I have one. Oh. Okay.
A comment and a question. You focused on the oil companies and the way the disinformation they bring out. That's true, but the reality is that we have petrostates in this world like Russia who are producing, really that's the principal source of their income. And so trying to get those states to change, I think, is a harder task. The $45 million, is that being spent now, and what is it being spent on in terms of projects that are going on?
That's great. The board, so this was just passed in May. The board met in October. And this is creating a new quasi-governmental institution. So it's being stood up, and a lot of people are working on that. A quarter of the funds can be spent before the strategic plan is developed. So the next year is going to be being spent developing a strategic plan, but some of that funding a quarter of it is available for more immediate needs. So that is really going to be decided in the next 2 to 3 months here. But we envision a lot of possibilities. We have, there are projects lined up, and I'm not just talking about M&IPL projects, but projects that are out there that could move if they have some financing. So I'm hopeful that that will be one piece of that. I think we'll know more soon. Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask my question. It seems to me like the HERC is a huge attempt to solve something at a massive scale. Are there communities that have smaller community HERCs by distributing the pollution caused by the HERC and not have to have it be this massive thing that then has massive impact on the surrounding community?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not expert on incinerator work, but just since I don't know the answer to that question, I'll just divert and say that really the groups who are working on it, large coalitions, are thinking about what does this require? It requires a transformation of how we see our relationship with waste and the degree to which we extract. How do we design so we're not designing to throw away, but designing to take apart and recycle? How are we making sure that we're diverting what we can divert? One of the exciting things that's going to happen this session is a bill, it's called 100% capture of e-waste. We're throwing away 6,000 phones a day in this state. And then what we hear is that we need to create more mines to get metals. And I'm not saying that metals aren't important, but the first thing we need to do is capture the metals we're throwing away and recycle them. And we will make great strides towards that if we do that. So be on the lookout for the 100% e-waste recapture effort. How is that for not answering your question? Thank you very much.
We have a hand for our presenter. Thank you. Just a quick plug for next week. Yep. Okay. So our presentation next week is agrarian. Our presentation for next week is Agrarian Faith, Regenerative Farming, and Just Eating as Christian Practices. The Reverend Carrie Meyer lives on a regenerative fruit farm in Hutchinson, and she'll be presenting on what their experiences, and so come and learn more about that, which is essentially another way of getting at some of these same issues, but from a different perspective. So please join us next week. Thank you.